Hello, everyone, and welcome to the future of space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Pete Worden. He is the chairman of the Breakthrough Prize Foundation and executive director of the foundation's Breakthrough Initiatives. Prior to joining the Breakthrough Prize Foundation, Pete was director of NASA's Ames Research Center. He is a recognized expert on space and science issues and has been a leader in building partnerships between the governments and the private sectors internationally. He has served as a scientific co-investigator for three NASA space science missions, most recently the Interface Region Imaging Spectrograph launch in 2013 to study the sun. Pete, it is so nice to have you on the future of space.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I'm happy to be here.
All right, before we get into your background and what you're working on with the Breakthrough Foundation, can you share with us three words that capture the essence of space for you?
Sure, infinite, eternal adventure.
Talking about adventure, if you have the opportunity of going to space, will you take it?
Absolutely. I would in an instant.
So the flight, but also going to the moon.
Going to the moon, going beyond, any place in space, I'd go.
Excellent, excellent. So we know that space there's a science story of going to space. There's technology, but what is for you the human story, and why will it benefit the human species and also the Earth going to space?
Well, I think the most important thing to understand is space is different things to different people, and I sort of like to use an analogy that an old friend of mine, Rick Tumlinson, did 15, 20 years ago. I mean, he gave three justifications, and I'm going to add a fourth one, which I think is better, uh, or at least to me more important. The first one is about national power and national influence, and of course he named that after Werner von Braun, and that's a significant reason. And the second justification, which I think is foremost for a number of people, is science, the search for knowledge. He named that one after Carl Sagan. The third one is about bettering the human condition, that by using space and by living in space, that we can have, a better life. And that's he named after that one after Jerry O'Neill, who talked about space colonies. Well, I think that the for me the best reason is the three words I gave you at the beginning. It's about the human spirit. It's about an unlimited adventure. And I named that after Arthur C. Clarke, who was a mentor of mine and a friend. And I think if you read Arthur's writings, you see that as a key part. So I think that we've sort of run out of places to really have an adventure that is really inspires your soul, and space offers that unlimited in time and space.
Do you think that from the perspective of life, it never wanted to be limited to just one planet? Like for the same reason that it went from single cell to multi-cell and evolution kind of took a quantum leap at that moment. Now we're about to go from single planet to multi-planetary. And if the principles of life on Earth is to connect, then it shouldn't be different on the universe level. Life also wants to connect with other life spots, and now we're about to take that life and go and try to connect with other life sources in the universe. Do you think that life actually wants to go to space?
Well, I think it's an imperative of life that whatever uh, made us and made life, and chemistry or other things, spiritual dimensions. There is an imperative to expand into other locations. I sort of like Edwin Schrödinger, the sort of famous quantum physicist, wrote what's still one of the best discussions of what is life. It was in the early 1940s, and he sort of, now he later corrected himself, but I think he actually had it right. that life is the universe's answer to entropy. That the universe is tending towards disorder and less coherence, but life locally and in a short period of time reverses that entropy. It creates order and uh, consistency. So yes, I think that it is an imperative of what we are to expand into every available niche.
I think that's one of the successes of the human species is to we actually managed to rise above the unpredictability and the what I call the constructive chaos of nature. Because before, when we were nomads, we were kind of at the mercy of change and nature because we had to follow the weather, we had to follow the food source, and at one point we decided to take control, we settle down, and then we're able, and every time that we were limited by nature, we found a way to go beyond, whether it's by location, diseases, medicines, now even with obviously reproduction. And now we're about to defy again the limitation of nature by going to space and taking the chaos of space and making us more adaptable to it. So, what do you think?
Well, yes, it's a I think it's all of the above. That in some sense, from my own justification of space was, and by the way, I'm interested in going well beyond the solar system. In fact, when I was a young boy, one of the first books my mother gave me were two of them. One was called Planets, the other was called Stars. And I thought the planets one were kind of boring, and that because all the planets in the solar system, there's no scary aliens or anything interesting. It's although I think we're going to find there's life elsewhere in our solar system, but I was interested in the stars because I think there's an unlimited potential there. And again, I want to get back to the adventure, and I think we will find other life other places. Uh, Now, whether it's intelligent is a definition of what intelligence is, and I think we're going to find when we do find alien life and even alien intelligence, it's going to be far more alien than we can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that there's a lot of. I do believe that there's a lot of life out there. Now, the intelligent life, that's a different question. I mean, it takes a particular amount of luck and circumstances for intelligence to come out. Had it not been for the asteroid to kind of come down and create a blank canvas after the dinosaurs, most likely there would still be life on Earth, whether it's intelligent or not. Well, that's a different question. Now, I want to circle back to your own journey. You were in NASA. Now you're working for the foundation, and you talked about these mentors, C. Clarke, and other inspirational figures in your life. But can you share with us a little bit your journey from the Pete who just graduated from high school to where you are today?
Well, I could even go, as I mentioned, I was a little boy when I first read these books, and I asked my mother, well, my father, what do people do that study the stars? And they're called astronomers. So I wanted to be an astronomer, you know, ever since I can remember. And when I went to high school, I looked around at what college to go to go into astronomy, and it turned out that I was lucky that one of the best astronomy schools in the country was the University of Michigan, which I went to. By the way, for other Michigan alumni, go blue! And but the when it was during the Apollo program, I went to Michigan in 1967, and uh, everybody wanted to be an astronaut. There was 120 astronomy majors my freshman year. It ended up six of us actually got degrees in astronomy. Most of us discovered that you needed to know math, and that was a big discriminator. Fortunately, I did well in math, and in the end, only two of us ended up getting a PhD, and I think I'm the only one left still working on it. So it was, but it was really the excitement of both as growing up, being excited about astronomy, and then the Apollo program. Uh, my father was an Air Force pilot, and he wanted me to go to become a pilot, to become an astronaut. So these all sort of intertwined, and I ended up spending 29 years in the Air Force. I was, a finalist once for astronaut selection and didn't get selected. So I'm kind of jealous of astronauts like Chris Hadfield and other things. But I had a great career otherwise, and but it's I think that the ever since I can remember, and that this was my motivation. It was about going into space. It was about going as far into space as we can. It was about finding if there was life elsewhere. I was a science fiction geek in high school. I used to hide science fiction books in my textbook, and uh, you know, got, got in trouble with the teacher, and one of the teachers made me put the book away. So I spent the rest of the time terrorizing other students. And the teacher finally said, "Okay, why don't you just read the science fiction book?" But it's and even today, I mean, I'm 72. The adventure is just beginning. It's very exciting. Every year is more exciting than the previous.
So you work for NASA, you made your way to NASA, and now you're working for the Breakthrough Foundation. How did that transition go, and exactly are you trying to achieve, or the foundation is trying to achieve, and the prizes that it's giving away?
Well, let me start with as an astronomer, as an optical astronomer, most of at least the United States' large observatories are built with private money. And when I got to NASA Ames, uh, I was sort of in what the military would call a target-rich environment. There were a lot of billionaires around. In fact, right next door to our center was a little startup you might have heard of. It's called Google, and I got to know the founders and then CEO Eric Schmidt pretty well, and it occurred to me that we ought to be able to find some of the exciting things that we wanted to do and have them funded privately. I also have always been a critic of NASA. I think that NASA spends far too much money, and I mean, it's sort of inherent in the government. And if we could leverage private investment for philanthropic reasons, we could do wonderful things. So I was always looking for some billionaires, and it turned out I found one. Uh, One day, my chief of staff came into my office, and she said, "You'll never guess, who's here to see you." And I said, "No, I probably wouldn't." And she said, "Well, it's Vanity Fair." And so I sort of, well, am I the best dressed center director? And she said, "No, you're kind of near the bottom." But the It turned out that, in fact, just a few days ago, Vanity Fair had their usual event. They host a post Oscar party, and the I've never been invited. I keep hinting, but Yuri Milner, my current primary sponsor, was invited, and he was motivated by the idea that he and his colleagues, like the Sergey Brin and Mark Zuckerberg, have made billions. In fact, there's been several $trillion made in the last few decades based on science discoveries of a century ago. And he feels we ought to inspire uh, the next generation by, if you look at the list of the most admired people on the planet, very few scientists are in it. Maybe Einstein and possibly Stephen Hawking. So he and his colleagues felt we should have the Oscars of science, and they decided they wanted to have the ceremony at NASA Ames campus, and so I agreed to do that. And of course, the old saying is, if you're going to have a big party, invite the landlord. And so I was a landlord, and I got to know these folks pretty well. And I, with sort of malice aforethought, I invited Yuri over to see the Kepler mission, which was as probably a lot of the viewers recall, has found many thousands of planets and has basically shown that probably every star system in the galaxy has planets, and at least a quarter of them maybe has a planet the size of the Earth in a habitable zone. And so I showed him around, and at the end of this, I said, "Well, I'd like to suggest maybe you might want to sponsor this satellite to look for planets in the Alpha Centauri system." And he said, "Well, I want to do that, but he said I'll also I want to help you build a starship." And I'd almost been fired a year or two before by pushing something called the 100-year Starship, which I and a DARPA program manager we ended up spending about $1 million looking to start again privately funded interstellar efforts. He did get fired, and I came pretty close. But Yuri Milner had heard about this, and so over the next year, we began to discuss. He said, "Look, I want to not just reward science; I want to do science." And so he said he was willing to spend many hundreds of millions to look for life in the universe. And once he started talking to me about, "Do you know who could maybe run this for me?" And I said, "Me." and so I told the NASA lawyers that okay, I'm looking for a new job, and that was in 2015. In fact, almost exactly 7 years ago, I was on the 1st of April was my first day with the Breakthrough Prize and Breakthrough Initiatives. So in addition to the prizes, which I oversee, we have the Breakthrough Initiatives, which are looking for life in the universe, looking for evidence of intelligent life, looking for evidence of any life, and ultimately, to me, maybe the most exciting, can we send probes interstellar distances?
Now, when I recently did a keynote presentation about the power of nature, and in it, I mentioned my own theory of why we have life on Earth. And it's not precisely because we have the ingredients of life, but because these ingredients are constantly being mixed by the cycle around the Earth, between the day and the night and the seasons. All that creates actually disruptions. It's like making bread, where you can have the the ingredients of making bread on the counter, but you can stare at them for thousands of years and nothing's going to happen. There's no bread. For bread to happen, you need to create disruptions. You have to put these ingredients together, you have to create a rhythm, and then you put them in the oven. Do you think that in the science world, we tend sometimes to look at these ingredients, but not at the context and where these ingredients are? So, if we're looking at life in the universe, do we need to look more into these places of disruptions and conflict where these ingredients can be mixed together and where life can emerge?
Well, that's a very interesting question. In addition to our scientific programs, we have an annual conference every year called Breakthrough Discuss. For the last 2 years, unfortunately, we've had to do it just online. This year, in June, we're gonna do it in person again. And one of the key questions we've asked is, how did life begin, and where do we look for it? And I'm sort of an iconoclast, and when I that most people would give me the discussion that you did, that well, there were pools on the Earth that or underwater vents that where there was this mixture and ferment. I actually tend to believe that there's an interesting point that life showed up on Earth within a few hundred years of the Earth cooling. I and some other scientists think that that's not enough time for it to emerge here on Earth, and I will say some very smart scientists disagree with that. I think that it came from elsewhere, and this is a theory called panspermia. I think our galaxy is infected with life, and I think we're going to find life everywhere. And I don't know where it originated. It could have originated in interstellar space. It could have originated on planets. It could be carried between star systems. We now know there's quite a few interstellar, asteroids going between star systems. In fact, in 2014, it looks like an interstellar meteor actually hit the Earth, a small one. So we have material that's mixing, and so I think we're going to find that there's life under the surface on Mars. I think we're going to find there's life in the atmosphere of Venus. I think we're going to find there's life in the ocean, frozen ocean worlds in the outer solar system, Europa, Ganymede, Enceladus, Titan, maybe even places like Pluto. And I think the universe is alive now. How it evolves depends on the environment. But I have a little different view. I think we live in a living universe.
Actually, I absolutely agree with you 100%. It's the I don't believe that the way nature works on Earth is different than the nature of the universe. And if we go back to the bread analogy, where if you have just a mixture of flour and water on the counter, yeast, something invisible that we see, yeast actually will come down and will start ferment and create, that's how it was discovered. And I do believe that this same principle applies, but on a universe level. There's all these invisible particles of life in the universe that if they find a place where they can start to have the right conditions, then the process of fermentation starts to happen, and then slowly and gradually you have this living organism. And so I absolutely agree with you that the universe is alive in that same way, but it's just at different scales. So the principles of it is the same, but just different scales. So I guess you agree with that.
Well, I even would go further and to say that I think we're going to find that first of all, we don't have a real good idea what life is. As I noted, it was Schrodinger's definition is probably as good as anybody, but it's that I think we're going to find that environments that we might find processes in plasmas. I mean, there's ideas that dusty plasmas could form life. I think there'll be different chemistries that can form life, and I think that it'll be very hard to recognize it because uh, it may operate on vastly different timescales. One of my favorite science fiction books was written several decades ago by Robert Forward, and he a quick synopsis is that humans discover this neutron star approaching, which is a fairly stable neutron star, and they go send a mission and discover there's stuff on the surface that's actually life, but it's operating in sort of the nuclei of heavier metals, and so it operates a million times faster than than humans do. And for a brief moment, the two intelligences, interact. But I think we're going to find that it's very hard to recognize what life is. One of the best definitions that I found is in modern definitions is by Professor Lee Cronin at the University of Glasgow, and he said it's defined by complexity. There's a certain amount of complexity that non-living, matter or chemistry or plasma can do, and at some point, if you see something that's more complex, maybe orders of magnitude more complex, then that by definition is life.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the realities of life that humanity struggles with, the complexity of it, because we try to create a certain stability, but life is not meant to be perfect, is not meant to be fair, because it needs a certain unpredictability. And what it constantly creates disruptions so that it can adapt and move forward. And for us, we're like, no, like we need to create that stability. But life doesn't really care what species is successful in moving forward, as long as something is moving forward. And by constantly keeping on everybody on their toes, it just wants to make sure that something is being pushed forward. What do you think about that?
Well, absolutely, and I guess again I keep going back to that our inability to recognize life, and uh, there's a couple interesting points. Is that it wasn't until a few decades ago that we recognized there were two forms of prokaryote, simple microbes. We knew about bacteria, but then we found out that there were these whole other class of microbes uh, that archaea. So we didn't even recognize half the life forms on Earth were something alien. And so I think that we may even find there's other things on the Earth that are living as we begin to look at them. And of course, then the second part of it is that this gets into the intelligence question. How would we recognize intelligence? And one of the kind of experiences I had, about 15 years ago, before I had bad arthritis, I used to do mountain bike rides across countries, and I did a mountain bike ride across Costa Rica. And I was with a British group, and we were staying kind of in a jungle area in a small, sort of lodge. And of course, the Brits had brought along some gin and some tonic, and we found some local citrus. And after a couple of these, we found that the call of nature, you know, emerged. And so I went outside and out in the one of the trees, and I all of a sudden noticed there was a creature in the trees, and it was a tree sloth. And apparently, tree sloths about once a week come out of the trees to do the same thing I was doing. And I looked at this animal, and it seems to be going very slowly. If you ever watch a tree sloth, and but you look in the eyes, and it's a primate. It's quite a intelligent animal, but you wouldn't have recognized it because and it turns out I later read that their metabolism is only 5% or so slower. But what if it's 10 times slower or 100 times? Would you have even recognized that this was life, let alone a fairly sophisticated, intelligent life in some characteristics? So again, I think we need to open our definitions of life and intelligence. So for all we know, we've detected life elsewhere. It's one of the other things is that we've begun to look at, there are places that Mars, of course, has been the traditional discussion of finding life, and of course, I'm quite excited. I'm in a minority here, but I think there's life in the upper atmosphere of Venus, and it's based, I suspect, on a different chemistry. One of the things on the Martian surface is that the regolith, the soil, 0.5% of the soil is perchlorates, and perchlorates are highly energetic molecules, and there are natural processes to produce it. But my suspicion is that whatever life there was on Mars, and there was large scale oceans, had probably a chlorine excess relative to nitrogen, and so that we're going to find the life on Mars is perchlorate energy cycle. In fact, there is life in the Atacama Desert that is based on that. Similarly, I suspect we're going to find, there are beginning to be evidence of processes in the upper atmosphere of Venus that those are probably based on sulfur, and that we keep saying, well, there can't be life there because life as we know it wouldn't survive in that chemistry, but there can be radically different chemistry. So this is one of my objectives in our projects is let's open our apertures for what we look for.
I need to put you in touch with Guillermo from Humans to Venus, because he actually believes also that Venus is a more, first of all, it's another opportunity, but also one that is more closely related to the kind of lifestyle that we have because of the gravity and because of some of the other characteristics that Venus offers. So I don't know if you know Guillermo, but I'll make the connection if you're interested.
Be happy to chat with them. Well, Venus is interesting because now there's a big argument: did it ever have water? But maybe it didn't need water. Our foundation, funded a major study by Professor Sarah Seeger at MIT. That she was in a team that detected, and there's some argument about whether they really did detect phosphine, which is a gas that on Earth is always associated with some life process. And but they did a study that showed that there are processes and chemistries that could operate. And there's a level in the Venusian atmosphere about 50 kilometers above the surface where the temperature and pressure is about the same as it here is on the surface. Now, it's in the middle of sulfuric acid clouds, but she showed that ammonia and other processes can stabilize that, and that so that you could potentially get a different kind of life process. So, that's I think Venus may be the most exciting place. And of course, I'm aware that various folks have talked about, well, you could put a cloud city there, sort of like they did in Star Wars. And so it may turn out to be one of the most interesting places in the solar system.
Now, I want to ask you the. I feel that one of the failures of the environmental movement is that, first of all, they created a really bad narrative about the human species. We constantly hear that the human species is a cancer on the planet, we're bad, we judge the past, and how could we do the past? But they also didn't offer a way to explain or to move forward with growth, because growth is an inherent reality of life, and we cannot stop growth. We can choose how we grow. I think that part of the past has been to choose more of a linear and growth at the expense of everything else. Now there's other models of growth. I mean, the Japanese have the Yutori concept of growth, which is, has different components. The Keith Raworth now has the donut economic model. Do you think that well, first of all, do you think that the human species is a bad species, or we're just the best and the worst of nature?
No, I think we are what we are, and that we're life, and we're, by our own definitions, intelligent life, and we're the first species that has the ability to expand into the solar system. I think that I go back to my various motivations. I mentioned the third one that Jerry O'Neill started, was that we can make life a lot better by building habitats in space. In fact, the current adherent for this is Jeff Bezos, who I've met a few times, and his view is that let's build these habitats that could be tens of billions of people living in them, and we would preserve the Earth for light industrial activity, and there's sort of unlimited resources in space. And I think that I know people say, well, you're going to pollute the moon. Well, my point is, if you've seen a picture of the moon, it looks like a nuclear war has already occurred there, and so I'm not really worried about polluting the moon. Now, I am concerned if we find there's life on Venus or in Mars, that we have to figure out how to live with that. But the universe is pretty infinite, so it's I think that one of the motivations that 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 we can make things a lot better. Although I have to say that to be a little bit kind of sort of a smart aleck, is there was when I was I think a graduate student, somebody had a bumper sticker that said, "Save the Earth. Let's strip mine the other planets first." And but I think there's a little truth to that says that you have an unlimited amount of resources, and that we can use those resources to adjust things. One of the really interesting experiments that was done a few decades ago was the Biosphere 2 project in Arizona, and they had the idea was you could close this environment, and they discovered that was almost impossible. That things went wrong, but if you allow just a tiny bit of taking waste out of there and bringing material in, you could adjust this sort of infinitely. If you think of the Earth, which is a bigger biosphere, if we are limited to try to adjust everything on just this planet, it's going to be almost impossible. But if we can begin to adjust a few small things, I think we can make the Earth the paradise that the environmentalists want to do, and preserve it, the diversity of life, and expand in an infinite direction. So I think growth is not a bad thing. Growth is a good thing, and being able to engineer things in a much more open system enables us to have a lot better environment.
I actually wrote about how the sooner that we can mine off the planet, the better it will be. I mean, there's no debate either taking resources from the Amazon or taking it from a asteroid or from a desert land like the moon. I mean, there's no debate there. Of course, we're gonna do it, off the planet. But the other the other thing that I wrote was about how, if you look at the concept of a house, you have your house and you have your backyard and you have plants, but all this is just more for the look because everything that you need, all the input that you need and the output that you do is taken from somewhere else. You're able to export all of the material that you create, the the garbage and your sewage, but everything that you need, the energy, the food, all that is taken from somewhere else. Because if your backyard had to process all this, then there would be the power structure, there would be the sewer structure, and the same thing is going to happen with the Earth once we start to go to space, because we will be able to import and export, and the pressure on the Earth are going to be less and less, and Earth is going to become more like your garden. Now, it's not going to solve everything, but it will definitely give the Earth the opportunity, the capacity to become more just of a place that people can enjoy rather than being the source of the resources that we need.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the, I mentioned I'm in Luxembourg, and one of the reasons I'm in Luxembourg is first of all, it's a beautiful country, and I fell in love with it over a decade ago. But I am an advisor to the Luxembourg government on space resources and their space program, and the that I think they recognize as a small landlocked country that, just as you said, you have to import and export a lot of things, and that we can do the same thing as a planet. And uh, we can bring critical resources from space, but we could also, eject things that are too dangerous to be here, whether they're nuclear waste or whatever. And it has to be done carefully, but and I, I mean, I'm convinced that global warming and climate change is an incredibly serious problem, but I think it can be fixed or at least adjusted from space. And I know this is highly controversial, but one of the things I'm very excited about is what's called solar geoengineering. That you adjust the amount of energy that comes in the sun, and there's a location at the L1 point between the Earth and the sun that you could build massive sunshades. People say, well, what if you goof it up? And I say, well, it turns out it's pretty easy to change it. If you're taking too much energy out, you can turn these things off. If too little, and those would all be built with space resources. And I think increasingly we're going to have to do something like that to handle the horrible climate change problems that we have. And that's an example of using, making an open system, not a closed system.
So you kind of opened the door for me because I wanted to ask you about Luxembourg. It is a small country, but really important in the space community. I think that there's a leadership that the government has recognized, and there's a lot of organizations that are in there. Are you the one responsible for kind of manipulating the strings behind the country and making them aware, or
Well,
um,
no, but I can tell you the story how that it got started. I was the director of NASA Ames, and we had a postdoctoral fellow who was in astronomy from Luxembourg. And as I discovered that most Luxembourgers like to have really good wine, and so I invited him over to have good California wine. And he said, well, I should go visit Luxembourg. And I said, for the wine? He said, well, they have very good wine. He said, but he said they're interested in starting a space program. And I said, Luxembourg, isn't that little country between France, Belgium, and Germany where, you get low cost fuel and booze? He said, yeah, that's it. But he pointed out that in the 80s, Luxembourg had founded SES, which is one of the world's largest communication satellite companies. And so I came to visit and was really impressed. And of course, it's a small country, 600,000 people. And I ended up meeting some of the government ministers. The one that I hit it off best with was the new minister of the economy, Etienne Schneider, and he soon became the deputy prime minister. And he tells the story a little different. He said, "Look, we want to work with NASA. What should we work on?" And so I gave a couple things, and I mentioned space resources. He says he thought I was smoking something, but I think he really liked it. So uh, we decided to have a series of workshops with Luxembourg, two in California and one in Luxembourg, and they decided that their long range economy depended on new things, and space mining was an initiative, and because it's a rich country relatively, he had access to a few €100 million. Uh, and so we started a space program, and Jean-Jacques Dordan, the previous Director General of ESA, and I were the first advisors. Uh, and it really worked out quite well. Now I guess they either blame me or credit me with helping them, because they did knight me as a Legion of Honor of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. Uh, but the by the way, that and €5 gets you a cup of coffee in Luxembourg. And but I think the country is a couple things. One is it has a very creative leadership. They have a long history of making decisions like the SES decision. They've also pushed IT and banking and other high tech things. And it's a small, nimble government. Uh, if you go to the farmers market in Luxembourg here, you'll see the ministers and the prime minister. You just and you can get decisions made. And I think that's sometimes we look at giant countries like the U.S. or China are going to do space, and I think that in the future, particularly as private sector, that a country like Luxembourg that can pass a law quickly and can make decisions is going to lead us into our space future.
If people want to know, because I want to be mindful of your time, if people want to know about the work that you do for in Luxembourg, but also with the Breakthrough Foundation, the Breakthrough Initiative, they go on the website and all the information is there, I assume.
Yeah, the Breakthrough Initiatives has a website, and there's a lot of information on that. We also publish articles periodically, also the Breakthrough Prize Foundation, which is you know we're in some sense we're competing with a certain Swedish prize I'm not supposed to mention. But in Luxembourg, the Luxembourg Space Agency has very extensive information on their website, and indeed they're soliciting more companies, and that I think already there's something 70 startups here in Luxembourg, and a lot more on the way. They've started a program at the University of Luxembourg for called the Space Masters program. That's very exciting. They have a new laboratory, the European Space Resources Innovation Center, that is very well funded, is joint with the European Space Agency. They have laws that are really friendly towards space of all forms, and so I think I would look at their website. It's actually quite an exciting program. And yes, the wine is very good in Luxembourg.
I'll make sure. I'll make sure that all the links are in the description of the this interview, and maybe I'll put we'll give me your a couple of favorite wines, and we'll put the links on for those wine also.
Well,
Do it
Luxembourg is best known for its sparkling wine,
sparkling.
which until the EU got after them, it used to be called champagne, but it's now it's called Cremant. And
Vermont, Vermont, yes.
you know, I'll shamelessly advertise the one I like best, which is Alice Hartmann. But I think it's better and much more affordable than some of the best champagnes. So come and visit Luxembourg, have some Cremant.
Absolutely, we'll do so. Are you planning on being in the United States this year, or are you going to stay in Europe most of the
Yeah,
time?
I spent a third of my time in the U.S. We have our main office in Silicon Valley, and but then we're opening. We've just opened an office here in Luxembourg. I'll end up spending two-thirds of my time,
Okay.
uh, and so I, you know, sort of split between both places.
Well, I'm gonna call you Sir Pete. Apparently now you're knighted, so I have to be formal.
Well, yeah,
Um,
interesting enough, they don't use that title. So I asked the deputy prime minister. I said, "What do they call me?" And he says, "Well, it's in French. It's Knight Commander of the Legion of Merit of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg." And I said, "Is there a short version of that?" I said, "No, just put the whole thing on your card."
all right, the French people would always make it complicated anyway, so they wanted.
No, it's
How's your French? Is it good or?
not very good. I mean, it's interesting. Luxembourg has three official languages:
Yeah.
French, German, and a very old Germanic language called Luxembourgish. But English is spoken everywhere, so it's kind of a multilingual place. Very very cosmopolitan, very international.
Pete, it was a pleasure discussing life, the universe. I feel like we just need a bottle of Cremant, and this could go on forever. But we will make
That's
that
right. Well, I have some in the U.S., so if you get to California or you get to Luxembourg, let me know.
absolutely. We'll do so. Thank you so much, Pete.
Thank you.